Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a wooden mission house perched against the wind-scraped coast of 18th century Greenland, where the floorboards groan like half-awake whales and the air is so cold your breath feels like it's crystallizing right there in your nose. You're lying under a heap of rough wool blankets listening to the slow rasp of the Arctic morning as it tries, a little unconvincingly, to convince you it's time to get up. Outside, the faintest bruised pink light leaks across the fjord, though calling it sunrise is generous. It's more like the sun is texting you. Ugh, fine, I'm coming. And honestly, you probably won't survive this if you forget how thin these walls are and how aggressively the cold likes to negotiate. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love seeing the little constellation of sleepy humans we form across the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink awake, staring at a low plank ceiling that's just close enough to bonk your forehead if you sit up too fast. So you don't. Not yet. Instead, you lie there feeling the sting of cold on your nose, the only part of you bold enough to peek out from your blankets. The mission house around you still sleeps. The muted shuffle of someone rolling over in the next room, the soft hiss of the stove giving up its last scraps of charcoal heat, and the distant grumble of wind pressing against the shutter. Your wool shirt, yesterday's wool shirt, tomorrow's wool shirt, is stiff as cardboard at the foot of your cot. You eye it like it's a mortal enemy. Greenlandic missionaries didn't own many clothes. Laundering was a luxury, and soap was only slightly more precious than divine revelation. Historians still argue whether these early mission homes smelled rustic or apocalyptically funky, but you're leaning toward option 2. You finally sit up, and yes, your head clips the beam. Good morning. You pull on the wool anyway, the fabric scraping against your arms with that crunchy, slightly damp texture that promises absolutely no comfort. You wiggle into heavy stockings, forcing your toes into half-frozen boots you left too close to the draft last night. You whisper a quiet prayer, not the spiritual kind, but the please don't be icy kind, and stand. The floorboards are definitely icy. Somewhere down the hall, Brother Hans is already awake. You can tell because he clears his throat, like he's resetting an entire cathedral organ. He rises earlier than everyone else, partly out of piety, partly because he refuses to admit he goes to bed at 8 like a time-traveling grandpa. He's shuffling around the communal room, coaxing the stove back to life, with the persistence of someone who absolutely should have been a blacksmith instead. As you step into the hall, you catch a whiff of something faint but distinct. Last night's seal oil lamp. The stuff never quite leaves the air. It threads through the mission house like a permanent guest, slightly smoky, slightly fishy. And about 40% of the reason your clothes feel oily, no matter how you wash them, missionaries eventually stop noticing, though you're not sure that's a sign of adaptation or surrender. You duck your head as you move through the low door frame because this house was built by people who were either short or had extremely optimistic posture, and step into the big room where the morning congregation will happen. Right now, it's dim and half awake, lit by a few flickering scraps of dawn squeezing through the shutters. There's a small table with a Bible, a psalm book, and a candle stub that has clearly seen better centuries. Before the day really begins, you take a moment to smell the air again, wood smoke, cold breath, wool grease, and that constant tang of the sea, the combination that adds up to Mission Life Starter Pack. You can almost feel the house retaining memories of the many, many mornings just like this. Moravian missionaries in Greenland followed a clockwork routine so strict you can practically hear the gears turning. They woke before the sun, partly because they wanted to, partly because the sun just didn't do its job for half the year. You run a hand over your face, feeling sleep cling to you like lint. A joke flickers through your head. If this were a modern morning routine video, it would absolutely start with a shot of your frosted window and a voiceover saying, "So here's how I start my cozy Arctic day." But nothing about this is cozy. Even the stove seems reluctant. Popping once in warning as Brother Hans feeds it another chunk of precious driftwood. He glances up at you with a nod that says, "Up already? Brave of you." Or maybe it says, "You look like you lost a fight with your pillow." Hard to tell in this lighting. As you settle onto a bench, you rub your hands together for warmth, waiting for the others to rise. One by one, your companions shuffle in. Sleepy eyes, tangled hair, a few damp coughs, because absolutely everyone gets sick here at some point, and expressions that say they too are questioning their life decisions. Then there's Brother Matthias, who's always oddly cheerful in the mornings. He walks in humming a psalm like he ordered extra joy from the universe and it arrived early. Rumor has it he once fell asleep standing up during evening prayers. So he compensates by acting aggressively awake at dawn. A quirky tidbit: he sincerely believed the Arctic air made him holier. Historians still argue whether that was conviction or frostbite-induced optimism. You glance at the frost patterns swirling on the window, spirals like the inside of a seashell, or maybe like a sketch note from Mother Nature saying, "You're not going anywhere warm today." Despite the cold, the moment has its own beauty. This early, the world outside is silent except for the faint creak of sea ice shifting with the tide. A real recorded historical detail. Many missionaries later wrote that Greenland's mornings felt closer to God, though you suspect their toes violently disagreed. The bell rope hangs near the door, and at last you stand to pull it. The small iron bell outside gives a dull, chilly clang, more of a polite suggestion than a summons, but it does its job. The last stragglers emerge from their rooms, wrapped in blankets over their clothes, faces scrunched like they were just asked to solve algebra at dawn. Everyone settles, breath misting in the air. The candle sputters, the stove sighs, and the day, your missionary day, officially begins as you open the psalm book, voice still gravelly from sleep, and start the first slow echoing notes of the morning's prayer. You're still shaking the sleep out of your eyes as the last notes of the psalm trail off, hovering in the chilly air like little frost ghosts. Everyone around you manages a soft amen, although for at least 3 people it sounds suspiciously like a stifled yawn. Morning prayers in the mission house aren't exactly a rager, more like a warm-up stretch for the soul, if your soul were wrapped in 5 layers of wool and threatening to go back to bed. You close the psalm book and feel the stiffness in your fingers, the kind that makes you think, yep, circulation is optional now. But routine is routine, and your stomach has been filing official complaints since approximately the halfway point of Psalm number 4. Time for breakfast, the missionary version of fine dining, which is to say, hope you like fish. You move toward the long, rough-hewn table in the center of the communal room. A loaf of rye bread sits there in all its dense, brick-like glory. The thing is less bread and more structural support beam, but you slice it anyway. The knife skittering a little because the crumb is dry enough to audition as desert terrain. Next to it, someone has placed a bowl of cold boiled fish from last night's pot, plus a small lump of butter wrapped in cloth like it's a sleeping baby that must not be woken. Butter is rare and therefore revered. You take a generous, missionary generous, smear of it, just enough to convince yourself that breakfast isn't a punishment. The fish, on the other hand, has accepted its role as the main character in your diet. Mainstream historical fact. In 18th century Greenland, missionaries ate fish so often that several complained in letters home that they couldn't smell anything else anymore. This probably didn't help the overall mission house aroma, but hey, at least no one had to guess what was for dinner. You plop onto the bench, breaking off a piece of bread so dry that it practically poofs crumbs into the air. Brother Hans sits across from you, elbows planted wide like he's trying to assert dominance over the table. He mutters a quick grace, and the room answers with a quiet chorus of amens before everyone begins the slow, resigned ballet of chewing. Someone behind you sighs contentedly, the kind of sigh that usually accompanies pancakes or a surprise weekend. Here, it simply means their fish doesn't taste too fishy today. Small victories. As you eat, your thoughts drift lazily, wandering between sleepiness and the familiar rhythm of the morning. A quirky tidbit from the era slips into your memory. Some missionaries insisted the best way to stay spiritually focused was to avoid overly exciting foods. Judging by the gray fish on your plate, you're about as spiritually focused as a human can get. If you get any more holy, you might levitate. The daylight grows, hesitantly, through the shutters. Daylight is being generous, though. These morning hours feel more like the sun is peeking in to check on you, sees you're doing chores, and politely decides to stay out of it. You sip a tin cup of warm water. Tea would be nice, but you're out until the next ship decides not to sink, letting the steam rise in thin, hopeful curls. Matthias plops down next to you with enough energy to make the bench wobble. He points at your fish, eyes twinkling. Looks friendlier than yesterday's, he says, which is true only if one considers less slimy a personality trait. You offer him a piece of bread, he accepts. And the two of you chew in companionable near silence as the room buzzes with low chatter. A few missionaries discuss the weather. A few complain about how stiff their boots have become. Someone at the far end breaks into a small rant about how the stove keeps eating wood like it's trying to grow bigger, which earns a couple chuckles. Humor is currency here, and thankfully you get paid daily. The conversation eventually drifts toward the plan for the day. There's always a plan. Devotions, lessons, chores, visits, and the endless patient work of understanding and being understood. Historians still argue whether the missionaries adhered to their schedules out of faithfulness, or because, without structure, everyone would descend into Arctic chaos within 48 hours. Personally, as you try to scrape the last smear of butter from the cloth without looking greedy, you think the structure helps. Without it, someone would probably start trying to train a seal as a messenger pigeon. As you take your final bite, the door creaks open, inviting a sharp gust of cold that sweeps through the room like a judgmental ant inspecting your housekeeping. Everyone instinctively tightens their collars. A tiny flurry of snow skitters across the floor, the flakes glittering in the dim light before melting into little water spots. Brother Elias steps inside, stamping his feet. "Wind's picking up," he announces, voice carrying the weight of a man who has had enough wind for one lifetime. This is a man who once described Greenland's weather as having strong opinions, which is one of the nicer ways to put it. He hangs his coat by the stove, and its smell, snow, smoke, and seal oil, spreads into the room. Breakfast is ending anyway. Most of the bread has been claimed, and the fish platter has been picked so clean it's basically a minimalist art installation now. The candle on the table sputters its last flame and dies, like it was emotionally overwhelmed by the morning. You rise with the others, pushing back your bench. As usual, a thin silence settles, a kind of intermission between food time and do things time. You rub your hands together again, ready to face whatever tiny victories and mild disasters the day has planned. Before leaving the room, you help clear the table, stacking tin plates and brushing crumbs into a bucket destined for the chickens. Those poor chickens, living in a climate that absolutely did not ask for their presence. They lay eggs sporadically, which means breakfast sometimes includes a rare, thrilling scramble. Not today, though. Today's menu was the same old Arctic boot camp. No surprises. You catch Matthias humming another psalm as he carries plates toward the wash basin. He hums a lot. It's either nerves or an attempt to keep spirits up. Maybe both. A reminder that even among the tight schedule and icy mornings, these missionaries were just people. Tired, hopeful, overwhelmed, and occasionally very hungry people, trying to navigate a land that demanded more than it gave. You tighten your scarf, adjust your boots, and step toward the door leading outside. The day awaits, endless chores, biting winds, and the persistent quiet resolve to make something meaningful out of the cold. The door opens, the wind greets you like an overenthusiastic dog. And there you are, fed enough to function, warmed enough to start, and already wishing lunch will be something other than fish. You lean your shoulder into the mission house door, pushing it open just wide enough to slip through before the wind tries to take it clean off the hinges. The cold hits you instantly, sharp, unbothered, and entirely uninterested in your personal comfort. It slides down your neck, slips under your shirt, and reminds you that in Greenland, outside, is the world's most unforgiving personality test. Your boots crunch into the snow with that crisp, satisfying sound that would be relaxing if it weren't attached to the fact that your toes currently feel like frozen peas. Behind you, Matthias mutters something about regretting every decision that led him here. Ahead, the mission yard sprawls in its winter uniform, a stretch of white broken only by fence posts, a half-buried woodpile, and the glint of sea ice catching the pale morning light. Your first job is obvious because it's the same every morning, finding water. The novelty of chop ice wore off after day 2, but you grab the long-handled iron chisel anyway, feeling its cold bite through your mittens. Somewhere inside, there's a bucket waiting for you to fill it, and by the sound of Brother Elias's morning coughs, he'd really appreciate a warm drink sooner rather than later. You trudge toward the frozen stream at the edge of the settlement, a short walk that still feels like a marathon when the wind keeps shoving at you like a rude sibling. Each breath crystallizes in your scarf. Each step sends a tiny shiver up your spine. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Missionaries depended heavily on freshwater ice because the seawater was too salty and often too dangerous to access in winter. They became experts at turning frozen blocks into drinkable water, which is a skill you suspect will not translate well in your modern life unless you move into a walk-in freezer. Reaching the stream, you kneel and begin chipping. The ice is thick, stubborn, and loudly disapproving of your efforts. Every strike echoes through the stillness. Crack, crack, crack. Tiny shards fling up at your face like frosty confetti, celebrating absolutely nothing. Harder! Brother Hans calls from behind you, somehow managing to sound like both a coach and a disappointed uncle. I am trying harder, you shout back, though your voice comes out as more of a grumbly mist cloud. After enough chopping to make you question every life choice since birth, you break through to the water, dark, cold, and rippling faintly. You dip the bucket in, careful not to splash yourself, because hypothermia is not a vibe you're going for today. The bucket fills slowly, the metal creaking as the water chills it instantly. Then comes the worst part, carrying it back. No handles warmed by ergonomic rubber. No cozy gloves with heat tech woven in. Just you, your wool mittens, and a bucket so cold it feels like punishment for something you might have done wrong in a past life. You grip the handle anyway. The weight is uneven, sloshing gently as you trudge home. Behind you, Matthias has taken over the chisel, grunting with each swing. He mutters something about, "This counts as prayer, right?" And honestly, it should. Halfway back to the mission house, you pass the wood pile, a mound of driftwood and chopped logs stacked like treasures. Fuel is never abundant, and you can see the mission's never-ending chore schedule reflected in those carefully arranged pieces. A quirky tidbit pops into your mind. Some missionaries kept favorite logs for especially cold nights, naming them like pets. You don't know whether that's charming or evidence of deep psychological decline, but you're not judging. If giving a log a name makes you feel less cold, you say, go for it. You reach the door again and nudge it open with your elbow, trying not to spill the bucket. The warmth inside smacks you in the face like a friendly blanket. Well, a lukewarm blanket. Still, it's better than the Arctic wind's personality. The room greets you with misty breath clouds and the smell of damp wool heating slowly by the stove. You set the bucket down beside the basin with a loud thunk. The others murmur approvingly. Few sounds in the mission house are more universally adored than a full bucket of water. From here, the baby chores of survival begin. You rinse the wooden ladles, refill the kettle, wipe yesterday's sleep from a couple of metal mugs, and check on the stove. The fire burns shyly, one of the logs glowing orange like it's embarrassed to be seen working this early. You open the stove door, letting in a breath of cold air that makes the flames flicker. You feed it another log, maybe not a named one, but definitely one with potential, and watch as the fire flares brighter. The warmth spreads slowly across the room, unhurried but determined. While you tend to the stove, Matthias comes in carrying an armful of half-frozen laundry. Laundry in this climate is an act of defiance. Clothes never fully dry. They just vacillate between slightly damp and arguably crunchy. He hangs them on a rope above the stove where they drip faintly onto the floor before stiffening again. Historians still argue whether laundry took days or weeks to dry in early Greenland houses. Standing here, watching steam rise from the shirts like they're reluctantly exhaling, you'd say weeks is the safer bet. Next chore, sweeping the floor. The mission house has a strict less snow indoors than outdoors policy. a rule that your boots threaten daily. You take the broom, a bundle of twigs bound together with string, and begin sweeping the drifts of snow and bits of dirt that blew in earlier. The broom bristles shed more twigs than they gather, but you persist. As you work, Brother Elias drifts in with a bucket of seawater to use for scrubbing tough stains, cured by boiling. He explains, for the fifth time, that salt water has magical properties for cleaning. You nod politely, even though you're 93% sure he's just looking for an excuse to go visit the coast and gossip with the fishermen. A tiny moment of levity arrives when Matthias points out a glove stuck to the windowsill, frozen there, like it tried to escape overnight and failed. You peel it off with gentle sarcasm, joking that it should have left a note if it intended to flee. The room chuckles because in Greenland, humor survives where warmth doesn't. By the time the chores are winding down, the room looks, well, tidier is too strong. Let's go with less chaotic. The fire finally chases the chill from the corners. The kettle begins to sing softly. The laundry drips in rhythm with the crackling wood. You straighten your back, feeling the faint ache of the morning settling in. The basic work is done, water hauled, fire fed, floors swept, and runaway gloves rescued. These chores don't make for glamorous stories, but they're the backbone of daily survival in the Arctic. They're the reason you're warm enough to think straight and hydrated enough to speak during lessons later. And sure, none of this will earn you a saintly portrait in a history textbook, but without these early tasks, the entire mission would collapse into a shivering, thirsty disaster. You wipe your hands on your wool shirt, shake out the cold lingering in your shoulders, and step toward the table where your ink-stained notebooks wait. The morning's physical labor is over. Now it's time to stretch your brain, one Greenlandic syllable at a time. You reach for the small bundle of writing tools on the table, your quill, the inkwell that always leaks slightly, and the stack of rough paper that crackles like thin bark when you bend it. Your fingers are still stiff from the cold, so the quill feels awkward, like you're holding a feathered icicle instead of a writing instrument. Still, this is the next task of the day, learning Greenlandic, or rather, inventing a way to write Greenlandic before you can truly learn it. No pressure. You sit down at the long wooden table where pale morning light spills across the planks. The warmth from the stove hasn't fully reached you yet, so you tug your wool collar higher. Across from you, Brother Matthias plops into his seat with a sigh that says he'd like a nap before he even begins. He dips his quill and promptly splashes a dot of ink onto the table. Artistic flair, he mutters. Very intentional. You smirk as you open your notebook. Several pages already contain smudged attempts at consonants, vowels, and phonetic guesses that you're pretty sure represent real sounds. But Greenlandic, Kalaallisut, isn't a language that politely hands you its secrets. It's full of long, braided words that feel like they were crafted by someone who wanted to compare stories to waves or snowdrifts or seal hunts. A mainstream historical fact drifts to mind as you stretch your fingers. The early Moravian missionaries really did develop some of the first written forms of Greenlandic, painstakingly creating alphabets and grammar guides from scratch, often by sitting exactly as you do now, shivering at a wooden table while trying to coax meaning from syllables you barely understood. Brother Elias arrives with today's informal tutor, an Inuit hunter named Pavia, who steps inside with a confident stride and a wolf fur hood still drifting with snowflakes. He greets you with a quiet nod. His presence warms the room more than the stove does. He carries stories like other men carry tools, practical, familiar, and ready to use. He sits between you and Matthias, glancing at the open pages. His eyebrow lifts slightly, as if wondering why you've written 3 different versions of the same sound and labeled them all possibly correct. You clear your throat and begin repeating the phrases you practiced last night, slowly, carefully. Pavia listens, head tilted. Then, with a patient smile, he repeats the same phrases, but smoother, richer, and with a rhythm that yours very much does not possess. When he encourages you to try again, you do, shaping each syllable with exaggerated care, like you're handling something delicate. He chuckles softly and kindly when your tongue trips over a cluster of consonants. Close, he says, though the tone makes you suspect close is generous. Meanwhile, Matthias attempts a word so long it might qualify as a full paragraph. He gets 3 syllables in before Pavia raises a hand, eyes twinkling. No, he says simply. Very no. You all laugh, and the room feels a little less bleak for a moment. Humor, again, does what wool and fire sometimes fail to do. It warms people. You dip your quill again, letting the feather tickle your knuckles as you write down the updated spelling of a phrase meaning, "The ice is thick today." Pavia watches your strokes with interest, occasionally pointing out a misplaced mark. He's fascinated by the idea of capturing spoken sounds on paper, a magic trick of sorts. He taps the letters, then says the word again, slower, inviting you to bridge the gap between sound and ink. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some missionaries, frustrated with the sheer length of Greenlandic words, joked about needing extra long notebooks just to fit one full sentence. You glance at the sprawling term you've just attempted to write. It seems less like a word and more like a mini-saga, complete with plot development. Your hand cramps, your wrist protests, your quill catches on the grain of the paper, leaving a blot. You sigh, blot again with a cloth, and soldier on. Learning a new language is never simple, but learning one while also trying to design its alphabet, that's a special kind of challenge, like assembling a puzzle while someone keeps handing you new, oddly shaped pieces. Outside, the wind whips against the shutters. The sound seeps into the room, underscoring the lesson like a moody soundtrack. Pavia pauses, glancing toward the window. Then he taps a word you've written, one referring to drifting snow, and nods approvingly. Good, he says. Very good. He shrugs as if to say, don't get greedy. At the far end of the table, Brother Hans clears his throat in that dramatic way that always startles someone. Remember, he says, voice deep and sermon serious, consistency is the key to writing languages. Historians still argue whether Hans was genuinely invested in linguistic innovation or just loved sounding authoritative. You're leaning toward the second option, considering he once insisted that adding extra letters would invite chaos. Your quill scratches on, marking new attempts. The ink-smudged page slowly fills with vocabulary, weather, hunting tools, kinship terms, simple greetings, and the words for landmarks you'll visit later today. You practice each one aloud, carefully shaping the syllables until Pavia nods in approval. Not enthusiastic approval, but the steady kind. After almost an hour of writing, your shoulders begin to ache. Pavia notices your discomfort and demonstrates a phrase meaning work is easier with warm hands. He gestures toward the stove. You take the hint. Setting your quill down, You stand and flex your fingers. They crackle like old hinges. You hold them over the stove's gentle heat, letting the warmth start seeping back into your skin. Matthias joins you, shaking his hands dramatically, like he's casting a spell. My fingers turned into dried fish, he says. They were like that before, you tease, earning a playful shove. When you return to the table, the ink has begun to thicken slightly from the cold. You stir it with the quill tip and dive back into practice. Only this time, your handwriting flows a bit easier, the sounds make slightly more sense, and the long, winding words don't seem quite as intimidating, more like challenges waiting to be understood piece by piece. Pavia shifts into storytelling mode, helping you link the language with scenes and images. He explains the different words for wind, because of course there are several. Greenland's wind has moods. He teaches you a term for the quiet between storms, which you immediately love. He even offers a word meaning snow that hides the path, which you decide might be metaphorically useful in your spiritual life and your daily chores. As he speaks, you scribble notes, grateful for the way language threads people together. This work isn't glamorous, but it's meaningful. It's how understanding begins. Finally, after hours that feel like days, your page is a cluttered masterpiece of letters, lines, arrows, and corrections. You hold it up triumphantly. Progress, you announce. Pavia studies it, nods, and says a single word in Greenlandic, one you learned earlier. Maybe. You laugh, but there's fondness underneath it. I'll take it. The lesson winds down. The ink dries. The morning inches quietly toward midday. You gather your pages, stack them neatly, and feel a warmth that has nothing to do with the stove, more like the glow of slowly building a bridge between worlds. And just as you tuck your quill away, someone calls from the doorway. Time to head out. We're visiting Pavia's family today. You exchange a glance with him. He grins. Your language skills might still be wobbly, but ready or not, the next part of your day awaits. You bundle yourself back into the cold with Pavia leading the way, his wolf fur hood bobbing ahead like a small, determined weather system. The wind greets you immediately, of course it does, whistling along the packed snow and tugging at your scarf. Your newly practiced Greenlandic words cling to your mind, trembling like nervous recruits about to face their first real test. Visiting an Inuit home isn't new, but each time feels like its own tiny expedition into warmth, storytelling, and a kind of hospitality that makes your mission house seem about as cozy as a storage shed. The path to Pavia's family home slopes gently toward the shoreline, where the ice gleams a dull silver under the shy afternoon sun. The sky stretches wide, pale, and enormous, like someone forgot to fully color it in. Snow squeaks under your boots, that particular squeak that only deep cold can produce. A trio of dogs perks up as you pass, their tails wagging lazily before they settle back into their curl-around-your-tail nap positions. Your breath fogs in front of you as you try to mentally rehearse a greeting. Alu, you think. Simple, friendly, hard to mess up. Unless you mess it up, which you definitely might. Matthias walks beside you humming a nervous tune, and you suspect he's also repeating vocabulary in his head. He tries saying a short phrase under his breath, but it comes out sounding suspiciously like he swallowed half the consonants. You give him a look, and he shrugs. They'll forgive me, he says. I have very apologetic eyebrows. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind as you approach the low turf and stone house. Inuit dwellings in this era were brilliantly engineered for warmth, built low to the ground with thick insulating walls, and often partially dug into the earth. They were dim, yes, but incredibly efficient at keeping families safe from the Arctic's bite. Pavia ducks through the entrance, more of a crawl than a doorway. You follow, bending nearly in half to fit. Your hands brush the sides of the narrow tunnel, the walls cool and earthy. Then, suddenly, you emerge into the main room where heat hits you in a soft, enveloping wave. The air is thick with the scent of seal oil, smoke, and something warm and savory simmering in a pot. You blink, adjusting to the dimness. Light comes from a seal oil lamp glowing in the corner, its flame dancing gently over curved stones and fur-lined bedding areas. It's a small room, but alive. Laughter, voices, the gentle clatter of tools. You instantly understand why early missionaries found these spaces so striking. They felt both foreign and deeply human all at once. A woman, Pavia's aunt, greets you warmly, her voice lilting with kindness, as she waves you toward a spot near the lamp. You attempt alu, the greeting you practiced. Your tongue trips, turning it into something like alu-ah, which sounds less like hello and more like you're ordering potatoes. But she smiles anyway, placing her hand lightly on your arm before offering you a bowl of warm broth. You accept it with both hands, the respectful way Pavia taught you, and let the steam soften your face. When you sip, it tastes like the ocean decided to give you a hug, a salty, slightly fishy hug, but still a hug. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some missionaries were surprised to discover that Inuit families often shared food communally from the same pot, passing bowls around in a rhythm that felt almost like a choreographed dance. It took some Europeans a moment to get used to it, but once they did, they wrote about the experience with genuine fondness. You watch now as family members move around the room with easy familiarity, offering bites of food, adjusting bedding, chatting softly. The atmosphere is warm, literally and figuratively, a contrast to the mission house where everyone tries so hard to maintain polite order that you sometimes miss the messy joy of shared living. Pavia sits beside you, speaking in his native tongue with a fluid ease you envy. Occasionally, he turns to translate a phrase or explain a joke, though you can sense meaning even before his words bridge the gap. Laughter is universal. Warmth is universal. The way the eldest woman pats Matthias on the knee when he nearly spills his broth? Universal. The space is full of objects that draw your eye. Harpoons polished smooth by generations of hands, fur boots drying by the lamp, and a small carved bone figure resting on a shelf. You admire it quietly until Pavia notices. He explains, slowly, so you can parse the words, that it represents a protective spirit for hunters venturing onto the ice. You nod, genuinely fascinated. Spiritual worlds overlap here, not always comfortably, but always curiously. Historians still argue whether missionaries fully understood the complexity of Inuit beliefs or whether they oversimplified them in their writings. Sitting here now, feeling the layers of meaning in the carved figure's quiet presence, you suspect the latter. Cultures are never simple. They're entire galaxies of stories, symbols, laughter, and lived experience. Matthias tries again to greet one of the children using his new vocabulary. He aims for, "Your coat is warm." But based on the child's delighted laughter, he might have said, "Your coat is a walrus." You all share a laugh, and Matthias takes it with admirable grace. "Well," he says, "the coat does have a vibe." More people arrive, filling the space with warmth and chatter. Someone hands you a strip of dried fish, and you accept it with gratitude. While chewing, you admire how quickly the room folds you into its rhythm. There's no awkward pause, no stiff formality, just a shared human moment. A small girl crawls closer, studying the ink stains on your fingers with wide, curious eyes. You hold out your hand, letting her trace the lines with a tiny fingertip. You show her your notebook, and she giggles at the squiggly marks. Pavia explains that she's amused by how many letters you need to write even a simple word. You nod, fully agreeing. Conversation lulls briefly as a gust of wind presses against the outer walls, making the lamp flicker. The house holds steady, warm, grounded, resilient. A reminder that survival here isn't an individual effort. It's communal, woven through relationships, shared stories, and the simple act of inviting someone inside from the cold. When it's time to leave, the family offers a round of farewells. You attempt a phrase meaning, "Thank you for the warmth," but you're fairly sure you said something closer to, "Thank you for the warm fish." Still, their smiles tell you the sentiment landed. You crawl back through the low tunnel and emerge into the bright, icy air. Your face tingles. Your clothes smell faintly of smoke and seal oil, and your heart feels fuller than your stomach, which, frankly, is impressive. Behind you, the laughter inside continues, muffled but unmistakably warm. Ahead, the mission house waits with its own chill and routine. You take a deep breath, pull your scarf up, and start walking, carrying the memory of seal oil light and shared broth with you through the snow. You're still carrying the warmth of Pavia's family home with you as you trek back toward the mission house, the cold air nipping hard at your cheeks as if trying to reclaim you. The shift from Inuit hospitality to missionary duty always feels abrupt, like waking from a nap and being told to solve algebra immediately. But there's no avoiding it. Midday at the mission is bustling, chaotic, and about as peaceful as a seagull convention held during a windstorm. You push the door open and are instantly met with the familiar flurry of noise. Someone drops a stack of wooden bowls. Someone else is calling for thread. A few voices overlap in a heated whisper argument about whose turn it is to patch the big tear in the communal coat. The mission house at noon is less holy outpost and more group project gone wrong. Your boots clomp across the floorboards as you hang your outer layer by the stove. The laundry you and Matthias hung earlier is still only halfway dry, clinging stubbornly to its icy personality. Brother Hans pokes at one of the shirts, frowns, and mutters that it's being theatrical. You can't tell whether he's joking or genuinely annoyed. With Hans, the line is blurry at best. A quick scan of the room reminds you what's next. Teaching. The small school corner, just a table, 3 benches, and a battered slate that has seen more scratches than actual lessons, is already filling with restless kids. A few Inuit children sit side by side with the missionary youngsters, creating a multilingual chaos that feels like a tiny United Nations meeting conducted by sleep-deprived toddlers. You take your seat at the table, smoothing the wrinkles out of your notes. Today's lesson, numbers, weather words, and maybe, a very gentle introduction to catechism. The trick is to keep it light. Heavy theology and fidgety children mix about as well as oil and snow. You greet the group with a smile, pronouncing their names carefully. You slip in a Greenlandic phrase you practiced this morning, something simple. A few kids giggle at your accent, but their smiles are honest, not mocking. Matthias sits down beside you, offering moral support and the occasional comic relief you know you'll need. You start with numbers, drawing them on the slate. As you point, the kids repeat you, some enthusiastically, some reluctantly, some while clearly daydreaming about seals or snow forts. One boy calls out a long Greenlandic word that absolutely does not mean 3. But since he says it with such confidence, you give him a nod of encouragement. Confidence is half the journey. A mainstream historical fact drifts in as you teach. Moravian missionaries truly believed that education, reading, writing, numbers, could be a bridge between worlds. They spent countless hours in rooms like this, teaching with limited tools and infinite patience. Or semi-infinite patience, depending on the day. Midway through the lesson, one of the girls tugs your sleeve and points to the window where snow is swirling in a sudden burst. "A put," she says. "Snow." You smile, repeating the word. She corrects your pronunciation with all the authority of someone who has been speaking the language since birth. You accept the correction. She beams like she just knighted you. As class continues, the mission house hums around you. Someone in the corner is mending a coat with giant, determined stitches that look more like medical sutures than sewing. Another pair of missionaries is having a quiet but intense debate about whether a certain fishing spear technically belongs to the community or was borrowed so long ago it has new ownership. Historians still argue whether mission life was genuinely harmonious or subtly chaotic under the surface. Judging by today's energy, you'd label it organized turbulence. When the lesson wraps up, the kids scatter faster than snowflakes in a gust of wind. A few pause to wave. One hands you a small carved bone button. You're not sure if it's a gift or they just didn't want to lose it. And then the room shifts into its next mode, midday chores. You gather your papers, stacking them neatly, but don't get far before Matthias stops you with the most dramatic sigh you've heard all week. "It's sewing time," he says, like announcing a national tragedy. Sewing time means gathering up every ripped mitten, torn tunic, and fraying boot for a communal mending session. You settle onto a bench with the others, threading a bone needle with coarse, slightly sticky sinew thread. The moment the thread touches your hands, you remember all over again how much you dislike this particular chore. Nearby, Brother Elias attempts to fix a hole in his sleeve, but keeps sewing it shut with his arm still in it. "This is sabotage," he growls. You gently intervene, freeing him from his accidental cloth prison. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some missionaries became so skilled at repairing clothing that they developed signature stitching styles, tiny personal marks that turned mending into a kind of code. You wonder what your stitch style would say about you. Probably tries hard, but gets distracted. While you sew, petty arguments spring up the way small weeds push through cracks. Someone claims another missionary misplaced the scissors. Someone else counters that they only borrowed them because someone else took their all. The mission house is a soap opera disguised as a religious outpost, and you're an unwilling extra in today's episode. Eventually, you finish repairing a mitten that looks slightly less tragic than before. You toss it onto the done pile with unnecessary flair, as if announcing victory. Matthias claps sarcastically. You bow. Next up is the task you've been quietly dreading, checking the storage shelves. Food is scarce this season, and inventory is important. You follow Hans to the pantry where dried fish hang like unsettling decorations and barrels of rye flour stand like sentinels of blandness. You open a barrel, sniff, and frown. Smells fine? You offer. Hans leans in, sniffs, and says, "It smells like compromise." You add that to your mental list of phrases dignified men should not say about food. By the time you finish taking stock of everything, fish, plenty, unfortunately, flour, mostly safe, seal oil, precious, and that one weird jar Matthias swears contains experimental jam, your stomach is rumbling again. But lunch is still a while off, and there's one more item on the schedule: resolving disputes. Yes, disputes. Because missionaries, contrary to the pristine portraits in history books, argued about everything: chores, tools, who took the last candle stub, who hummed too loudly during prayers, and whether the dog should be allowed inside during storms. Spoiler, they always ended up inside anyway. Today's debate is about a wooden ladle. Two people claim ownership. Neither will budge. You try mediating with calm logic, but both respond with the stubborn intensity of people who've been cold for 6 straight months. Eventually, you compromise. The ladle becomes community property to be used on alternating days. You've just solved the century's least important conflict. Add that to your resume. At last, the room begins to settle. Tools are put away, threads are rolled up. The mended garments are rehung by the stove. The arguments fade into mutters, then silence. You rub your eyes, feeling the weight of the day already pressing gently on your shoulders. The afternoon light angles low, promising another stretch of work and weather outside. The mission house is quieter now, but alive, busy, imperfect, human, and you, woven into its fabric through language lessons, mending, kids' laughter, and ladle diplomacy, feel the day tugging you forward again, toward letters, storms, and the long hours still waiting for you. The mission house finally exhales as the midday bustle thins out. Needles are set aside, the school corner empties, and the debate over the world's most controversial ladle dissolves into soft grumbling. You stretch your back, feeling a few vertebrae crack in ways that make you question your life choices, and drift toward the long wooden table by the window, the unofficial writing desk. A pale band of light slants across the tabletop, highlighting old ink stains, knife marks, and a few crumbs from breakfast that escaped cleanup duty. You brush the crumbs away and take a seat, knowing exactly what comes next. Correspondence. Letters home. Letters to colleagues. Letters to church leaders. Letters to people who won't read them for months. Or ever, if the ship decides to give up halfway across the Atlantic. You pull your writing kit toward you, quill, ink, paper, that feels both precious and cheap at the same time, and let yourself sink into the stillness. After the noise of kids shouting numbers in 2 languages, this quiet feels like slipping into warm water. Your shoulders soften, your breath steadies. A mainstream historical fact rises unbidden. Letters were the lifeline of missionaries in Greenland. Communication with Europe took months, sometimes half a year, depending on sea ice, ship schedules, and whether or not the North Atlantic felt like cooperating. People sent news, requests for supplies, spiritual reflections, confessions of loneliness, and long, rambling updates about the weather, because there just wasn't much else happening sometimes. You begin your own letter with the usual greeting, dipping your quill and shaping the letters carefully. The ink pools a bit at first. You always forget how watery it becomes near the stove. You write to a family member back home, describing your morning chores, the language lesson, and your latest victory in mending. You leave out the part where you almost sewed your sleeve to your leg. Some details can remain unshared. As you describe Pavia's home, the warmth, the laughter, the hospitality, you realize how hard it is to convey something so vivid to someone who's never set foot in this frozen world. You try anyway, painting the picture with gentle strokes. The glow of a seal oil lamp, the way steam from broth softens the air, the sound of children's laughter echoing under low ceilings. You pause, chew your lip, dip your quill again. The next part is harder. Loneliness, that slow, creeping ache that sets in when the world around you feels too big and Europe feels too far. You pick your words carefully. You don't want to sound dramatic, but you also don't want to pretend that everything is easy. Some evenings, you write, the wind against the shutters makes it feel as though the whole earth is empty except for us. You sit with that line for a second. It feels too heavy. You lighten it with a small joke about Matthias accidentally greeting a child by calling their coat a walrus. That should balance the emotional scales. As you keep writing, the door creaks and drafts a fresh wave of Arctic air across the room. Brother Elias slips inside, hugging a bundle of envelopes to his chest like he's carrying newborn puppies. Mail sorting, he announces. Ship's not due for months, but we should be ready. You nod and keep writing, but your eyes drift toward the bundle anyway. Your own outgoing letters will soon join that little stack, an archive of hope waiting for a ship that may or may not come. Elias spreads the envelopes out on the table, and you can't help but skim the names. Some addressed to Herrnhut, some to Copenhagen, some to obscure little villages back in Germany or the Netherlands, and one, just one, addressed to a sweetheart back home, though written so formally you wouldn't know it unless you recognized the handwriting. You smile to yourself. Missionaries weren't immune to feelings, despite the stoic vibe everyone tries to maintain. Once your letter is finished, you seal it with a blob of wax and press it gently with the wooden stamp. The wax cools quickly in the chilly air, forming a crisp impression. You set the finished envelope on the growing pile and start another letter, this time to the mission board. The tone shifts, more formal, more careful. You report on language progress, school attendance, food stores, ongoing needs, like more paper that doesn't crumble at the edges, and of course, the weather. There's always a paragraph about the weather. Historians still argue whether missionaries embellished the harshness of Greenland's climate in their letters to gain sympathy, or whether they downplayed it to avoid sounding discouraged. In the end, both versions probably existed. Today, you find yourself leaning toward a little embellishment. Your ink freezes mid-sentence. The wind is performing its own opera outside. Who could blame you? As you set aside the formal report, Matthias appears and drops into the chair beside you, looking like someone just told him lunch will be delayed. Writing letters again? He asks. Trying to, you say. You? He pulls out a crumpled page. Attempting poetry, he admits. You raise an eyebrow. Don't look at me like that, he says. Some of us process emotions through rhyme. You try not to laugh, but a tiny snort escapes. Read me a line. He clears his throat with excessive ceremony. The snow drifts deep against my door, and still I crave just one log more. You blink. Matthias, that's actually decent. He beams like you handed him a medal. But then he follows it with, And though the fish is bland today, I thank the Lord it didn't swim away. You regret encouraging him. The conversation dissolves into chuckles as he tries to rhyme Greenland with keen hand. It does not work. The shared humor warms the air between you, a reminder that companionship is what keeps you from collapsing under the weight of isolation. Eventually, Matthias returns to his chores, leaving you in the dimming afternoon light. You gather your letters into a neat stack, tie them with twine, and place them in the wooden box near the door designated for outgoing mail. You whisper a small wish over them that someone you love will read your words before next winter. You sit quietly for a moment afterward, letting the stillness wrap around you. Only the crackle of the stove and a distant murmur of conversation fill the air. The world outside feels impossibly huge, the distance between continents impossibly long. A gust rattles the shutters. You pull your shawl tighter, but you also remember the warmth of Pavia's home, the laughter, the shared broth, the carved talisman. Connections, you think, happen in tiny moments, and those moments travel farther than letters ever will. And as you rise to prepare for the next part of your day, you feel a soft, steady resolve settle into your chest. The storm may be coming, the ship may be late, the world may be wide, but you aren't facing it alone. You're only a few steps away from the writing desk when the shutters give a sudden, sharp rattle, like someone outside has decided to audition the wind for percussion duties. The sound rolls through the room, and every missionary within earshot glances toward the window with varying degrees of dread. Weather in Greenland doesn't ask permission. It announces itself with dramatic flair, then makes everyone rearrange their plans accordingly. You tug your scarf tighter around your neck as you move toward the door, drawn by the rising hum of wind against the walls. You push the shutter open just a crack. A gust of snow whips straight into your face, stinging your cheeks with tiny ice needles. You retreat immediately, muttering something that is technically PG-13, but emotionally R-rated. Behind you, Matthias wanders over, takes one look, and shuts the shutter with the seriousness of a man who has just seen something unholy. "Yeah," he says. "Inside day." Inside day. You know what that means. Cabin fever, fidgety missionaries, too much conversation, not enough tasks, and the kind of mood swings that could probably be graphed like weather fronts. A mainstream historical fact pops into your mind. Early missionary journals describe winter storms that lasted for days, trapping entire communities indoors with only oil lamps, prayer books, and each other's quirks to survive on. Several missionaries confessed privately that spiritual devotion was easy compared to the challenge of not throttling one another by day 4. And today? Well, today is off to a promising start. The wind outside roars louder, pressing its cold weight against the mission house. Snow slams against the shutters with the enthusiasm of a bored drummer. The walls creak, a deep groaning sound like the house is muttering, "Not this again," through clenched wooden teeth. Inside, the temperature drops quickly. You can literally feel the warmth fleeing your toes. Elias piles more wood into the stove, muttering darkly about the stinginess of the Arctic sun. You help him shove one of the larger logs inside, and when the fire snaps to life again, you savor the expanding circle of heat like it's a rare gift. But that warmth isn't enough to ward off the next problem, boredom. Missionaries trapped indoors too long begin to cycle through emotions like an erratic weather system. First, mild irritation, then restless energy, then existential dread, then snack time. Except there are no snacks except dried fish, and snack time with dried fish is more a punitive ritual than a treat. As the storm thickens, the mission house feels smaller and smaller. You step back from the stove and scan the room. Everyone is already showing early signs of storm brain. Hans has begun reorganizing the bookshelf again, something he only does when he's stressed or deeply annoyed by the weather. He mutters to himself about proper alphabetical order, even though half the books don't have legible titles anymore, and he's alphabetizing by sheer guesswork. Elias stares out the tiny window, eyebrows drawn tight, as if mentally interrogating the storm. That cloud is definitely moving south, he announces, or north. A beat. Historians still argue whether these coastal storms came from mainland patterns or local ice shifts. You blink, who's arguing about that? Me, he says, right now. Meanwhile, Matthias is pacing, not walking, pacing. Long, dramatic strides that would put stage actors to shame. He swings his arms, he sighs loudly. Occasionally, he stops to stare at the ceiling like it owes him money. Cabin fever, phase 1. You take a seat near the lamp, pulling out your notebook. Maybe you can review your Greenlandic vocabulary to stay productive. But the moment you begin, the lamp flickers violently, sputtering as the wind shrieks around the eaves. A few sparks leap from the wick, like they're trying to escape. You shield your page, whispering a stern, "Don't you dare," at the lamp. It flickers again, offended by your tone. A quirky tidbit from an old journal comes to mind. Some missionaries believed storms were tests of patience designed specifically for their spiritual growth. Others believed storms were signs that they should give up chores for the day and take long naps. You find yourself leaning toward camp number 2, but no nap for you, not yet. The room grows crowded as more people drift in, bringing sighs, blankets, and increasingly dramatic comments about the temperature. A few settle around the stove, holding their palms toward the flame as though worshiping a tiny fire god. You try once more to study, sounding out a Greenlandic word for storm swirl snow under your breath. You barely get through 2 syllables before Matthias stops pacing and drops into the chair beside you with a theatrical huff. "This is it," he says. "This is how we perish. We're not perishing. Not physically," he clarifies, "emotionally." You stifle a laugh, but a tiny snort escapes anyway. Hours slip by in slow, foggy increments. The wind howls, the walls shudder, the lamp hisses. You begin to suspect time has frozen along with your toes. Everyone has migrated to their coping mechanisms, sewing, humming, journaling, reorganizing, complaining, staring at walls, or playing the silent game with increasing intensity. Eventually, you succumb to the inevitable, looking out the window every 10 minutes to check if the storm has stopped. It hasn't. If anything, it's gotten moodier. The sky is a swirling mass of white and gray, a blizzard so thick it looks like the entire world has been erased. "Good visibility," Matthias observes, "if you're a snowflake." The hours stretch. The mission house becomes its own little world, and not a very sane one. Somewhere in the mid-afternoon lull, Hans begins telling a story about a storm last winter, where the wind was so strong it blew away a pair of boots left on the doorstep. The boots were never found. "Maybe they gained consciousness and ran," Matthias suggests. "I would." The storm keeps shouting, but inside, laughter ripples through the room, thin but real. Humor becomes insulation. Shared absurdity replaces sunshine. By late afternoon, the wind finally begins to soften. The shutters still rattle, but no longer with fury, more like a tired protest. The air inside takes on a lighter, less oppressive quality. People stop pacing, stop complaining, stop reorganizing the same three books. You return to the window. The snow is still falling, but gently now, soft flakes drifting like feathers. The kind of snow that makes you exhale instead of brace. You step outside for just a moment, just long enough for the cold to kiss your face in a gentler, quieter way. The world is hushed, softened by fresh snow, wrapped in muted beauty. And as the gray sky begins to brighten ever so slightly, a thought settles into your bones. Enduring storms is part of the missionary rhythm. Harsh, beautiful, maddening, humbling, and beyond them, always, comes a brief moment of calm that tastes sweeter because of the chaos before it. Inside, you close the door, rubbing warmth back into your hands. The storm has passed, but the day isn't done. There's food to prepare, chores to finish, and moods to stabilize. And somewhere in all that, a few quiet pockets of peace waiting to be found. The storm leaves behind a world muffled in fresh snow, soft, pale, and deceptively peaceful. You step back inside, brushing flakes from your sleeves, already aware of the next inevitable question circulating in the mission house. What's for dinner? The answer is almost always the same, but hope springs eternal. And hungry missionaries are surprisingly optimistic people, considering the evidence. You join the others near the stove, where the air is warmer and tinged with the comforting smell of something bubbling in a pot. You take a seat on a wooden bench and stretch your fingers toward the flames. Elias is stirring the pot with the seriousness of a seasoned chef, despite the fact that the recipe hasn't changed in months. He gives it a swirl, lifts a ladleful, and nods sagely. "Fish stew," he announces. "Better than yesterday's." Matthias leans in as if witnessing high art. "You added salt." "No," Elias replies, offended at the implication he'd waste such a precious thing. "Yesterday's was worse." You stifle a sigh. Fish again, always fish. A mainstream historical fact pops into your mind. Greenlandic missionaries in the 18th century relied heavily on seafood. Fish, seal, sometimes whale, especially during long winters. Fresh produce was rare, flour sporadic, and anything sweet might as well have been contraband. Still, you take your bowl gladly when it's ladled out. Hunger makes even monotony taste good. You settle beside Matthias on a bench, letting the steam cloud your face. The stew is warm at least, and the chunks of fish are firm, probably. As you eat, small conversations spark around the room like embers. People swap stories of meals they miss: soft bread, apples, cheese, real butter, proper coffee. You can almost hear the longing woven into the chatter. "Remember oranges?" someone says wistfully. "Remember fruit?" someone else counters. "Remember sugar that wasn't imported in thimble-sized rations?" Matthias sighs. A moment of silence follows, filled with collective yearning. You all stare into your bowls for a dramatic second, like philosophers contemplating the meaning of culinary suffering. And then, to everyone's relief, someone brings up a happier topic: feast days. Nothing lifts spirits faster than remembering the rare, glorious, tiny feasts that break the monotony. Moravian missionaries were famous for celebrating even small holidays with a bit of flair. You recall the last one vividly: the joy when a seal was brought in fresh, its meat divided evenly, and its fat rendered for lamps and cooking. The mission house filled with the rich aroma, a brightness of spirit spreading across every tired face. You grin, recalling the tiny feast where a precious pinch of sugar was stirred into warm water with herbs, creating something almost like tea. Everyone sipped it as if they were royalty. And then there was the day someone returned from a trading trip carrying a tiny packet of coffee, real coffee, like it was treasure rescued from a dragon's hoard. The resulting brew was weak, gritty, and tasted vaguely of smoke, but you all drank it reverently, savoring every bitter drop. Matthias sighs fondly. I could cry just thinking about that coffee. You did cry, you remind him. That's because it touched my soul. Your laughter mixes with the soft crackle of the fire and the hum of wind outside. The day finally feels warmer. You take another spoonful of stew. The flavor is mild but comforting all the same. Food doesn't have to be special to be grounding. Survival in Greenland is simple. Stay warm, stay fed, stay sane. 2 out of 3 isn't enough. A quirky tidbit slides into your thoughts. Some missionaries reported developing intense cravings for foods they hadn't even liked back home. Fresh apples, soft pastries, even cabbage. Their journals contain exaggerated odes to bread, written with the same intensity usually reserved for spiritual revelations. You believe it. Right now, you'd probably write a hymn about a freshly baked roll. Across the room, Hans stands by the pantry, tapping a barrel thoughtfully. We could save some flour, he suggests, for a special treat next week. A hush falls over the room. That's the closest thing to poetry Hans has ever said. Flour is precious, rare, temperamental. Saving it for future joy? That's optimism in its purest form. Historians still argue whether these missionaries maintained their morale through genuine faith or sheer culinary fantasy. You suspect both. As dinner wraps up, bowls are rinsed in warm water and set on the drying shelf. People linger on the benches, rubbing full bellies, savoring the glow that comes from eating something hot on a cold day. The mission house feels almost festive, despite the simple meal. You lean back against the wall, letting your muscles unwind. The atmosphere has shifted into that cozy post-meal calm where conversations drift slowly and comfortably. A few folks tell stories about feast days from their home countries, spiced breads at Christmas, sausage festivals, summer markets overflowing with fruit. The images fill your imagination, rich and decadent, almost painfully sweet in comparison to the meal you just had. But even as you picture them, you find yourself strangely content. There's something deeply bonding about sharing humble food in a place this vast, this isolated. The monotony becomes a shared joke. The small joys, a pinch of sugar, a rare slab of seal meat, a cup of pseudo-coffee, become celebrations. And speaking of joy, someone rummages through a chest and pulls out a miracle, a tiny scrap of cloth containing what looks like, no, it can't be, yes, dried berries, a few shriveled but undeniably real, a leftover from summer foraging. The room goes silent as they're divided. 1 or 2 per person. You take yours reverently. Their taste is brief, faint, but unmistakably fruit. You'd swear your brain produces extra serotonin on the spot. Worth its weight in gold, Matthias whispers dramatically. Worth its weight in jam, you reply. He gasps. Don't say such things. We're in a holy place. The laughter that follows rolls through the mission house like a warm wave. By the time the bowls are washed and the lanterns trimmed, your stomach feels full enough, your spirits lifted, your body humming with restored energy. Dinner may not be extravagant, but it does exactly what it needs to. It anchors you, grounds you, prepares you for the long stretch of evening work ahead. You gather your coat from its hook, brushing a few remaining snowflakes from the sleeves. Outside, the world waits, colder, darker, but calmer now. And inside, the mission house hums with the simple contentment of shared food, shared laughter, and the promise of warmth in the night ahead. You take a steadying breath. Another part of the day awaits, one full of medicine, worry, and improvised caregiving. But for now, you carry the taste of berries, the comfort of stew, and the soft glow of companionship as you rise once more into the Arctic evening. You gather your coat again, pulling it tight around your ribs as you step into the narrow hallway that leads to the mission's tiny infirmary, a word that suggests far more medical sophistication than actually exists here. The door creaks as you push it open, revealing a cramped room lit by a single oil lamp and smelling faintly of herbs, wool, and the unmistakable tang of seal fat. If the mission house were a body, this room would be its perpetually worried stomach, always churning, always bracing for trouble. Inside, Brother Elias kneels beside a low cot where a young man, Jakob, one of the Inuit helpers, lies bundled in blankets. His cheeks are flushed, his breathing shallow, and sweat beads along his hairline despite the cold that creeps along the floorboards. You can tell right away, fever. Not the mild, annoying kind. The kind that makes everyone tense their shoulders unconsciously. Elias glances up as you enter. Good timing, he says, though his tone suggests no timing would actually be good for this problem. His fever's been climbing. You kneel beside the cot, taking Jakob's hand. His skin is hot despite the cold air, a contrast so sharp it almost startles you. He murmurs something in Greenlandic, the words slurring together. Your recent lessons whisper their meaning back to you. Head hurts. Too hot. Please, water. Water, you repeat gently, brushing his hair back. A bowl sits near the stove with a ladle resting inside. You grab it and fill a cup, bringing it slowly to Jakob's lips. He drinks in tiny sips, pausing between breaths. The room falls into a quiet rhythm. Dip, lift, sip, breathe. A mainstream historical fact weighs on your thoughts. Healthcare in 18th century Greenland mission houses was improvised at best. Missionaries arrived with basic European remedies, herbal tonics, salves, a few imported medicines, but they knew little about Arctic illnesses or local treatments. Much of what they did was trial, error, prayer, and sheer stubbornness. You glance at the modest array of supplies on the shelf, a few small bottles of tinctures from Europe, several pouches of dried herbs, local and imported, a pot for steam, strips of seal fat for poultices, and a stack of cleanish linen cloths. It's not equipment, it's hope arranged neatly. Elias pulls up a stool, rubbing his hands together. I brewed willow bark, he says. Should help the fever. You nod. Willow bark, the old standby, a natural source of salicylic acid. A win for herbal medicine centuries before aspirin would be invented. You fetch the cup of bitter tea from the table. Jakob drinks a few slow gulps before turning his head away, grimacing. It tastes like sadness, Matthias once joked. Today, you'd agree. You help adjust Jakob's blankets and tuck a warm stone at his feet. Beside you, Elias dips a cloth into cool water and lays it across Jakob's forehead. The steam of his fever rises in faint wisps. As you work, a quirky historical tidbit pops into your mind. Some missionaries genuinely believed seal fat could cure nearly anything when applied correctly. Wounds, frostbite, headaches, toothaches, heartbreaks. One journal even describes a missionary smearing it on his temples to relieve brain chill. The verdict is unclear. You don't reach for the seal fat yet. Instead, you turn to something Pavia once showed you, heating herbs in a seal oil lamp to release soothing vapors. You gather dried angelica and juniper, place them in a small ceramic dish, and set it near the lamp. The room slowly fills with a warm, earthy scent, cleaner, calmer, a contrast to the sterile chill outside. Good, Elias murmurs. He breathes a little easier now. But as the minutes stretch into an hour, Jakob drifts in and out of consciousness. His fever doesn't worsen, but it doesn't break either. A quiet concern settles in the room like settling dust. The wind outside has stopped entirely, leaving everything eerily silent. Even the walls seem to hold their breath. And then, because tension cannot sit too long in a Moravian mission without someone cracking the lid, Matthias pushes through the door with a small wooden box in his hands. "I come bearing supplies," he announces in a tone far more heroic than warranted. "What supplies?" you ask. He opens the box with dramatic flair. Inside, 3 cloves of garlic, a stub of ginger from last year's trade ship, and what might be the saddest remaining chunk of honey in the entire settlement. You blink. "Where did you get those?" "Secrets," he whispers. You narrow your eyes. "You stole them from the pantry, didn't you?" He dodges the question with the skill of a seasoned diplomat. Despite the absurdity, the ingredients are genuinely useful. Garlic and ginger make a warming tea. Honey soothes the throat. You brew the mixture carefully, its spicy, sweet aroma filling the cramped room. Jakob drinks some with help, sighs, and his breathing deepens. The 3 of you watch him silently for a while, listening to the tiny changes in his breath. The lamp flickers. The herbs crackle softly. Snow shifts lazily along the rooftop outside. At last, Elias whispers, "He's cooler." You touch Jakob's forehead. He's right. The fever has eased, only slightly, but enough to loosen the iron band of worry around your chest. Relief spreads through you like warmth from a fire. "Good," you breathe. Good. Historians still argue whether these small improvements were the result of herbs, prayer, or the human body simply doing what it could. But sitting here, in the dim, dusty, humble infirmary, you know the truth is always layered. Medicine, hope, skill, warmth, community, all braided together. Jakob drifts into a deeper sleep, the tension melting from his brow. You pull the blanket to his shoulder and ease back onto your heels. The room feels softer now, gentler. Matthias lies down on the floorboards beside the cot, folding his hands behind his head. "If I stay here long enough," he whispers, "maybe I'll absorb medical knowledge through osmosis." "I doubt it," you say, "but at least you'll warm the floor." He nods solemnly. "My greatest contribution." You chuckle under your breath. The stress of caring for the sick always feels a little less crushing when humor sneaks in. After ensuring Jakob is stable, you step quietly into the hall, closing the door behind you. The mission house feels different now, quieter, heavier, but in a peaceful way. There's something deeply grounding about tending to one another in this frozen world. It's messy, improvised, full of guesswork, and yet it works, more often than it should. You rub your arms, suddenly aware of how tired you are. But the day still holds more for you, prayers to lead, doubts to soothe, souls to sit beside. For now, though, you take a moment to breathe in the stillness of the hallway, a quiet before the next unfolding task, a heartbeat in the long day. You linger in the hallway for a moment, letting the hush of the infirmary settle into your shoulders. The scent of juniper and angelica clings to your clothes, mixing faintly with the ever-present seal oil that marks every room in the mission house. You roll your stiff shoulders and take one slow breath before heading toward the main gathering room where the next part of your day, your spiritual work, waits with all its quiet weight. The room is dim when you enter, lit mostly by the orange glow of a few carefully trimmed lamps. Shadows sway gently along the timber walls, giving everything a soft, wavering outline. The benches have been rearranged since dinner, set loosely in a semicircle, facing the small table where a Bible and psalm book lie open. It's not quite time for evening prayers, but people are filtering in early, drawn by habit, and perhaps by the comfort of routine after the storm and the worries of the sick room. You take your seat, smoothing your palms over your knees to warm them. A few missionaries shuffle in behind you, their wool clothing whispering softly. 2 Inuit visitors slip through the doorway next, neighbors who often join the quiet evening gatherings out of curiosity or companionship more than religious obligation. Their presence feels grounding, a reminder that the mission is not a world unto itself, but a fragile thread woven into the wider community. A mainstream historical fact nudges your thoughts. Moravian missionaries were known for their intimate conversational approach to spiritual life. Instead of grand sermons, they favored quiet reflection, hymns sung softly, and one-on-one conversations that lingered long into the evening. They believed that pastoral work happened more in whispered corners than in crowded halls. Tonight, you can feel that philosophy in the air. You open the psalm book and begin humming the melody of a familiar hymn. Matthias joins in beside you, softly at first, then louder when he realizes he's actually on key this time. A couple of others follow. The sounds weave together gently, like threads pulled through cloth. In the corner, the lamp flickers in rhythm, casting strokes of warm light across the walls. When the final notes fade, you clear your throat and begin to read from the Bible. Your voice is low but steady. You choose a passage about perseverance, not because the day was especially difficult, though it had its moments, but because endurance feels like the quiet theme of life here. The words settle across the room with a soft weight. As you close the book, the conversation begins, not the formal kind where everyone takes turns, but the natural, drifting kind. Someone asks how to keep faith warm when the world outside feels so cold. Someone else wonders aloud how God views the people of this land who lived rich spiritual lives long before the missionaries arrived. A young missionary confesses that he still feels uneasy preaching in a language he barely speaks. Historians still argue whether these late-night discussions strengthened community or exposed the deep uncertainties simmering beneath missionary life. Sitting here now, listening to the voices mingle like smoke in the lamplight, you suspect it was both. Strength and vulnerability were never separate things in this place. They braided together like sinew threads in a winter coat. After a while, the room quiets. People bow their heads in collective silence, not the stiff, formal silence of church pews, but the soft kind that feels like a warm blanket being shared among many. You feel your heartbeat slowing. The day's exhaustion slips from your shoulders, replaced by something gentler. Not energy, exactly. More like a deep, slow breath. When the moment of stillness ends, people drift away in twos and threes. Some head to their bunks. Some return to chores they forgot. A few linger, stretching the calm a little longer. You stay seated for a moment, staring at the lamp's small flame. Its glow trembles in the draft, but never goes out, a tiny, stubborn metaphor you can't help but appreciate. Just as you're about to rise, you hear a soft shuffling behind you. You turn to see Pavia standing near the doorway, his hood pushed back, his expression thoughtful in the shifting light. He steps closer and lowers his voice. "Can we talk?" You nod and gesture for him to sit beside you. He lowers himself slowly, settling with the quiet ease of someone accustomed to silence speaking louder than words. You brace yourself, not anxiously, but with steady attention. Conversations like this are the real work, the spiritual work, and you never know where they will lead. Pavia takes a moment before speaking. "When my brother died," he begins, the words slow and careful. "You prayed for him. My family remembers." He pauses, staring at his hands. "I want to understand why your people pray the way you do." You nod gently. "I can try to explain, but I'd like to hear what prayer means for your family too." This earns a small, warm smile from him. So you talk, not preaching, not converting, just talking. He explains his community's practices, the ways they speak to the land, to ancestors, to the spirits that guide hunters on the ice. You listen with genuine curiosity, feeling the gap between your worlds narrowing with each story shared. Then he asks questions about your faith, about grace, about hope, about the soft thread of prayer that ties people to something unseen. You try to answer simply, honestly, no grand claims, no rigid doctrine, just the quiet truth that faith feels like warmth held close on cold nights, like a lamp that keeps burning even when storms rage. A quirky tidbit slips into your mind. An old missionary once wrote that Greenland converts were won not by sermons, but by conversations near the fire. It feels fitting now. When the talk winds down, Pavia touches your shoulder lightly. "Thank you," he says. Then he stands and slips toward the door, the lamplight gilding the fur trim of his coat. You sit there a few minutes longer, letting the day settle in your bones. From morning prayers to icy chores to fish stew to fever care to this quiet, unexpected moment, it all flows together, imperfect and holy in its own soft way. Outside, the wind has calmed to a whisper. Inside, the lamp's flame leans gently to one side, as if tired from listening. You rise, your legs stiff, and stretch. There are still chores ahead, still nights to weather, still people to tend. But for now, the room feels warm, and your spirit steadier than it was an hour ago. The evening deepens, carrying you toward the long, dark hours of Arctic winter and the next chapter of this unfolding day. Night in Greenland doesn't fall so much as it descends, slowly, heavily, like someone pulling a thick wool blanket over the entire world. By the time you step outside to fetch an armful of wood for the stove, the sky has already deepened into a velvety blue-black. The air is so still you can hear the snow settling, the faint crack of sea ice shifting in the distance, and your own breath curling into the darkness like a tiny ghost with poor time management. You pause on the threshold, letting your eyes adjust. It's astonishing how dark winter can be here. Historians still argue whether missionaries struggled more with the cold or with the endless nights. But standing there, boots sinking into the powder, you have a pretty strong suspicion that darkness was the real test. Cold, you can fight with layers. Darkness, that requires something deeper. You gather the wood quickly, your fingers already going a little numb, and head back inside, nudging the door shut with your hip. The mission house swallows you with its familiar smells, smoke, wool, lingering dinner, and the faint herbal scent from earlier. It's quieter now, the calm that settles after evening prayers, like the building itself is exhaling. You set a few logs by the stove, feeding one through the iron mouth. The flames catch with a soft whoomph, sending golden light rippling across the room. You stretch your hands toward the warmth, feeling the cold retreat from your knuckles. Around you, the missionaries have begun the nightly ritual of pretending we're not slowly losing our minds. Matthias is carving something at the table, a spoon, or possibly a small abstract fish. It's hard to tell. Hans sits by the window, writing in his journal with the intense focus of someone whose certain future historians will thank him personally. Elias is humming a tune that might be a hymn or might be a lament for his lost favorite log. Hard to say. And then there are the stories. Winter nights are fertile ground for storytelling, something the missionaries adopted readily from their Inuit neighbors. The low lamplight, the hush of the wind outside, the long hours stretching ahead like a snowy road, they practically demand a tale or two. You settle onto the bench beside Matthias as he finishes carving the mysterious spoonfish hybrid. He nods toward the stove, where a few others have gathered, leaning close over mugs of warm water. "Go stories," he whispers with a grin. "It's tradition." Of course it is. Someone begins with a classic, the tale of the Kivitok, a person who leaves their community, wandering into the wilderness until they become something not quite human, not quite spirit. Their presence is said to bring both fear and protection, depending on the story. You listen with fascinated stillness, the flickering lamplight making the teller's face shift between shadow and fire. A quirky tidbit you once heard slips into your thoughts. Some European missionaries were so unsettled by Kivitok stories that they wrote entire letters home describing them as wandering hermits touched by madness, completely missing the cultural significance. Tonight, listening to the story told by someone who grew up with it, you understand how layered and powerful it truly is. Nothing like the flat descriptions in old journals. The tale ends, settling into the room like a drifting ember. Someone else picks up the thread with a story about a hunter who followed strange lights across the ice, lights that led him safely home. You feel the softness of that one, a reminder that not all ghost stories are meant to frighten. When the hum of tales fades, the room slips into quiet conversation. You find yourself talking with a young missionary who's struggling, not with the cold, not with the food, but with discipline. "It's the nights," she confesses softly. "When they last this long, I can't focus. My prayers feel empty." You nod, understanding all too well. Long winter nights do strange things to your mind. They stretch your thoughts until they feel thin and brittle. Concentration becomes a rare treasure. "Try shorter prayers," you say gently. "And maybe kinda ones." She looks surprised, then relieved. "Kinda ones," she repeats thoughtfully. You wonder how many missionaries have quietly whispered similar confessions over the centuries, their voices blending into the dark, seeking something steady to cling to. Spiritual challenges aren't always dramatic. Sometimes they're just a low, persistent ache. Later, as the room thins out, you pull on your coat and slip outside again. The air is cold enough to make your lungs sting, but the sky has cleared, unveiling a spray of stars that look close enough to pluck like berries. Northern lights shimmer faintly at the edge of the horizon, a green curtain lifting and falling as if stirred by a giant hand. The snow crunches under your boots as you walk a few slow steps from the doorway, letting the night wrap around you. Sound moves differently here, distant, softened by snow. Even your heartbeat feels louder. You tilt your head back, soaking in the sky. There's something comforting about its vastness. Back in Europe, the stars were often dimmed by smoke or fog or city lamps. Here, they blaze with unnerving clarity, as if reminding you how small and temporary your worries really are. Hans joins you outside for a moment, holding his own cloak tight. "Beautiful," he murmurs, every time you agree. He hesitates, then adds, "Sometimes I think we misunderstand winter. We call it dark, but look." He gestures to the glowing sky. So much light hidden in the cold. You smile softly. Not bad for a man who alphabetizes books by instinct. Back inside, you help trim the lamps, preparing for the last hour before bed. The glow dims into a mellow gold, shadowed around the corners. People speak in softer voices, laughter becoming the gentle kind that doesn't disturb the stillness. You take a final moment to write a few lines in your notebook, notes about the day, new Greenlandic words, a few reflections from your conversation with Pavia. Your handwriting leans slightly, tired but steady. You end with a thought you're not sure how to phrase elegantly, so you don't try. The night is long, but so is our endurance. With that, you close the book. The lamps are snuffed one by one. The house settles into silence, and you, wrapped in wool and the echoes of stories, drift toward your narrow bed, ready to surrender to the long Arctic night. You wake slowly the next morning, not because you're rested, but because the light in your room is all wrong. It's everywhere. It spills through the shutters in thick, bright waves, warming the wooden floorboards and softening the outlines of your blankets. For a confusing second you wonder if you overslept by, say, 6 hours. But then memory snaps into place. Summer has arrived. Greenlandic summer, where daylight stretches wide and refuses to sit down, is its own kind of weather phenomenon. After months of darkness, the sun suddenly becomes that over-enthusiastic friend who doesn't understand personal boundaries. You groan softly as you sit up, rubbing your eyes. The room already feels warmer. Not warm, just slightly less murderous. You can see dust motes drifting lazily in the bright beam cutting across your cot. The air smells different, too. A little salty, a little grassy. You inhale deeply, savoring the novelty. Summer here doesn't mean sunshine and flowers and picnics. Well, maybe very intense sunshine and one flower struggling between rocks. But it does mean you can go outside without feeling like your soul is freezing. You pull on your boots, grab your coat, out of habit more than necessity, and head out into the blazing early light. The moment you step into the open air, you squint so hard your eyelashes kiss your eyebrows. The sky is a pale, endless blue. The sun hangs like a golden coin, far higher than you remember it ever daring to in winter. Snow melts in patches across the hills, revealing earth the color of dark coffee grounds. And then you notice them, mosquitoes, dozens of them, a thriving, humming, deeply confident cloud buzzing lazily near a shallow puddle like tiny Arctic landlords come to collect rent. "Oh no," you mutter. Matthias appears beside you, slapping his neck dramatically. "They're back," he groans. "The true scourge of Greenland." A mainstream historical fact clicks into place. Early missionaries frequently complained, loudly and poetically, about the summer mosquitoes, calling them relentless and vile, and winged reminders of original sin. Some even wore veils or carried smudge pots to keep the swarms away. Today, you seriously consider stealing Hans's idea of stuffing dried moss under your collar as makeshift armor. But nobody has time to stand around debating mosquito strategy. Summer brings a burst of activity, the kind of frantic enthusiasm you only get after being trapped indoors for most of the year. The mission house practically vibrates with energy. Tools get dusted off. Plans get announced. Everyone suddenly remembers that maintenance exists. You barely make it through the door before Hans waves you over to where several missionaries are poring over a map. "We're rebuilding the storage shed today," he declares. "Weather's good, ground's soft enough. Perfect time." Perfect time, yes. Easy time. Absolutely not. You grab a shovel, feeling a suspicious sense of optimism warming your chest. You haven't seen the ground without snow in months. The idea of digging, actually interacting with the earth, is weirdly exciting. You follow the others to the storage shed, or what used to be the storage shed. Winter storm winds had not been kind. The roof sagged dramatically. A plank wall leaned precariously, as if eavesdropping on a conversation it wasn't invited to. "Well," you say with a long exhale, "it's still here. For now," Matthias adds. You begin tearing down the damaged planks, prying each board free with a grunt. The sun warms your back as you work. Sweat drips slowly down your temples, another sensation you haven't experienced since last summer. You feel your muscles stretch in ways they haven't in months. It's oddly satisfying. You carry off chunks of wood, stack new beams, and dig shallow holes for the posts. Meanwhile, mosquitoes stage strategic attacks on your neck. At one point, you swing your shovel so vigorously at a rogue swarm that Elias mistakes it for enthusiasm. "Great attitude," he calls. You grin weakly, not correcting him. As work progresses, you steal glances toward the coastline. The ice has receded dramatically. Meltwater trickles down the rocks in thin, sparkling ribbons. A group of Inuit children run past, laughing, splashing in puddles, as if cold water isn't cold. One child gleefully scoops a handful of slush and offers it to you as if gifting a priceless jewel. You accept graciously. They beam. A quirky summer tidbit comes to mind. Some missionaries tried planting little gardens during the warmer months, tiny plots with potatoes, turnips, or even barley. Most failed spectacularly. A few barely survived long enough to produce stunted vegetables that everyone praised as if they were royal banquets. You're reminded of this when Hans proudly announces that this year he'll be planting experimental carrots. You wish him well. You privately expect the carrots to file a formal complaint about being coerced into living here. After hours of hammering, digging, and swatting mosquitoes, the shed finally begins to resemble a real structure again, upright, sturdy, not threatening collapse. You take a step back, hands resting on your hips, feeling both exhausted and victorious. "Not bad," Elias says. "Not fallen down," Matthias adds, which is basically excellence. You laugh. The sun glints off the roof as you admire your handiwork, and just as you're about to call it a day, someone points toward the fjord. "Kayaks," they say. Sure enough, several Inuit hunters paddle in smoothly, their narrow boats cutting through the water like dark arrows. You watch them glide onto shore, hauling their kayaks up with practiced ease. One of them, Pavia, spots you and waves. You return the wave, then wander down to greet them. He shows you their catch, fish, a few seabirds, and seal meat, fresh, rich, and enough to feed several families. You admire the craftsmanship of the kayaks, light, sleek, impossibly balanced. Historians still argue whether early Europeans fully appreciated the engineering brilliance of Greenlandic kayaks or simply took them for granted. Seeing them now, you're certain they're masterpieces. Pavia smiles as you ask questions, answering patiently, pointing out details, even letting you touch the taut sealskin stretched across the frame. You run your hand along the smooth edge, feeling the resilience of it, a structure born from necessity and perfected through generations. The sunlight reflects off the water in dazzling shards. For the first time in months, you feel brightness, not just around you, but inside you, like something dormant has finally thawed. Later, as the afternoon stretches toward evening, you help carry supplies back to the mission house. Mosquitoes still ambush your ankles. The sun still refuses to set. Sweat still clings to your collar, but none of it feels heavy. Summer is brief here, a fleeting golden slice of time. But in this moment, its warmth feels endless. You step inside the mission house, skin buzzing with effort and sunlight, clothes smelling faintly of earth and sea. The room seems brighter, cheerier, as if borrowing some of the outdoor glow. There's still work ahead, still conversations, still tensions to navigate. But for now, the day hums with energy, warmth in the air, light in your eyes, and the promise of a long night that, for once, won't be dark. By the time evening begins its slow, reluctant drift across the summer sky, the mission house is buzzing with that unique, slightly chaotic energy that only follows a hard day's work. The shed stands proudly outside, the mosquitoes have retreated a little, and everyone's clothes smell faintly of sweat, sun, and sawdust. A surprisingly uplifting change from winter's stew of wool, smoke, and despair. You step inside and immediately feel the shift in atmosphere. Conversations overlap in gentle waves. Someone hums a tune. A pot simmers on the stove. Tonight it's fish again, of course, but somehow it smells brighter when cooked in summer air. You set your tools down, stretch your arms until your back pops, a noise so loud Matthias flinches, and drop onto the nearest bench with a groan of satisfaction. But even in this warm, hard-working glow, you can sense it, the simmering friction that comes with too many people living too closely for too long. It's normal, predictable, practically a tradition. Every summer, when energy runs high and chores multiply, so do small irritations. You see it first in the far corner, Hans and Elias sharing the world's tensest silence over a misplaced hammer. Hans claims Elias returned it to the wrong hook. Elias claims Hans labeled the hooks cryptically. You watch them exchange a stiff, polite nod that is absolutely not polite. The air between them crackles like static. A mainstream historical fact floats up as you observe them. Moravian missionaries were famously communal, sharing resources, work, and living spaces, but journals show plenty of interpersonal friction, from debates about chores to disagreements over theology to arguments like, well, hammer placement. The mission house wasn't a monastery. It was a pressure cooker. You stand stretching your legs and wander toward the table where Matthias sits carving a new wooden spoon, the third this month. You tease him gently. Compensating for something? Yes, he replies solemnly. The tragic loss of my ladle rights. You snort. Right. The great ladle mediation in which tempers flared, voices wobbled, and the outcome pleased no one except you, who still feel disproportionately proud of brokering a treaty over a piece of wood. Still, Matthias's humor only thinly masks the restlessness in the room. You see it in the way people fidget, the way voices sharpen slightly at the edges. Work heals winter's stagnation, but it also sparks friction like flint striking stone. As you settle beside Matthias, he hands you a mug of warm water. Don't drink it too fast, he says. It's today's luxury. You sip and let the warmth settle in your chest. Around you, the mission house moves through its evening rhythm. Someone repairs a torn sealskin boot. Someone else rewrites lesson notes. A young missionary leans against the window, staring at the sun that refuses to set, complaining faintly about the tyranny of eternal daylight. You sympathize. Sleeping during Greenlandic summer often feels like trying to nap while sitting inside a lantern. A small commotion draws your attention. Two missionaries arguing quietly but intensely about fishing tools. You approach, gently intercepting. After a brief exchange, you help them agree on a sharing schedule. Again, it feels like déjà vu, or maybe just daily reality. When you step away, a quirky historical tidbit flickers through your mind. One missionary wrote that summer made tempers lightning quick, attributing it to the unnatural brightness that robs the mind of darkness needed for rest. You smile at the dramatic phrasing, but can't deny the truth of it. Your own nerves feel a little overstretched, like threads pulled too tightly. Still, mood swings aren't the whole story tonight, because scattered between the misunderstandings and irritations are these tiny sparks of joy that blink into existence like fireflies. There, near the stove, two missionaries laugh so hard they clutch each other's shoulders. You catch the tail end of the joke. Something about Matthias accidentally greeting Pavia earlier with the Greenlandic equivalent of "Good evening, large fish." You choke on a laugh. At another table, the youngest missionary, barely more than a teenager, proudly reveals a small carved pendant shaped like a polar bear. One of the Inuit neighbors gave it to him in thanks for helping repair a damaged paddle. The pride glowing on his face softens the room like candlelight. Later, during supper, Pavia arrives with a small offering, dried seaweed and a piece of fresh seal fat for rendering. A gift, a generous one. The mission house brightens in response, not just from excitement over new ingredients, but from the warmth of connection. You sit with him while he explains how his uncle taught him the proper way to dry seaweed so it keeps its flavor. His voice is steady, calm. His presence eases the room. When you ask about his day, he tells you a story about a hunt near the cliffs where a flock of birds practically heckled the hunters. His reenactment of the bird noises is so perfect that you double over laughing. People turn to stare, but a moment later they're laughing too. The tension in the air dissolves like sugar in warm water. Eventually, the meal winds down. Plates are cleaned. Tools are stored. Lamps are trimmed. But instead of retreating into tired silence, people linger, swaying gently in conversation, softened by shared stories and the warmth of the meal. You find yourself drawn to the doorway where the golden evening light glows like a blessing. You step outside. The air is cool but gentle. The landscape radiates under the low sun, long shadows stretching across the hills, the sea shimmering in soft gold and silver. Beside you, Matthias leans against the doorframe. "You ever think about how we survive all this?" he asks. "Every day," you admit. He hums thoughtfully. "I think it's this." "This?" He gestures vaguely to the mission house behind you. "The people, even when they're annoying." You smile, letting the words settle. Because he's right. Feelings run high here: frustration, laughter, isolation, affection, all tangled together like thread in a mender's basket. But beneath that tangle is something steady and strong, a stubborn kind of togetherness. Inside you hear someone start humming a familiar hymn, not the formal kind, but the soft, half-sung tune people hum without thinking. Others join in, their voices low and warm, filling the mission house with a sound that feels like both memory and promise. You take one last look at the sun hovering stubbornly above the horizon, lighting the land in hues that make your chest tighten. Summer won't last long, but in this moment, everything feels possible. You step back inside, ready to face the last stretch of the day, with a heart a little fuller and a spirit slightly steadier. There's still the night ahead, still the quiet moments, still the reflection waiting for you by the fire. But for now, you're exactly where you need to be. The last threads of daylight cling stubbornly to the sky as you step back into the mission house, the summer brightness lingering like a guest who refuses to take a hint. It's late, later than your winter-trained brain believes possible, but the sun still paints a faint golden smear across the window panes. After months of darkness, you should welcome this endless light with both arms. And you do, mostly. But part of you misses the clarity of night, the way darkness gently tells your body, now, rest now. Instead, tonight feels suspended, neither day nor evening, just a glowing in-between. You walk across the main room, boots tapping against the worn planks. The scent of seal fat lamp oil lingers in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of dried seaweed from dinner. Matthias sits at the table, whittling yet another spoon, this one looking suspiciously like a duck. Elias is rolling up a length of sinew thread while humming off-key. Hans writes by the window, hunched dramatically over his journal, as if composing a masterpiece. You feel an odd softness in your chest watching them. These people have driven you mad all day. Misplaced tools, contradictory instructions, dramatic sighing over eternal sunlight. And yet, in this quiet moment, you wouldn't trade their company for anything. They've become your weathered, wonderful, quirky little world. You move toward the fireplace where the embers glow low and steady. You kneel, adding a final piece of wood. The fire doesn't roar, just brightens enough to cast warm ripples of light across the room, a perfect setting for reflection, or maybe melancholy, or maybe both. In Greenland, those two moods often travel as a pair. A mainstream historical fact echoes through your mind. Moravian missionaries kept extensive diaries, not because they expected to be famous, but because writing helped them anchor themselves. Daily routines, emotional frustrations, weather notes, the pages held everything they couldn't say aloud. In a place this vast, writing kept them from drifting. You settle onto a low stool and pull out your own notebook, letting your fingers linger on the cover before opening it. The page catches the soft glow of the fire. You write slowly at first, observations from the day, the shed rebuilding, the cloud of mosquitoes, the warm laughter over dinner. Your handwriting tilts slightly, evidence of your tired muscles. Then the deeper reflections begin to spill out, quiet truths you didn't plan to write, about how your Greenlandic is improving, how Pavia's stories linger in your thoughts long after he leaves, how Jakob's fever frightened you more than you admitted, how summer's intensity both energizes and unravels you. Historians still argue whether these missionaries truly understood the land they tried to minister in, or whether the land understood them better. Sitting here now, you suspect Greenland has been shaping you quietly all along, reshaping your rhythms, stretching your patience, sharpening your sense of wonder, softening the edges of your certainty. A faint draft brushes your shoulder. You turn and see one of the Inuit children, little Mari, peeking into the room. She pads inside silently, bare feet whispering across the planks. She carries something cupped in her small hands. When she reaches you, she opens her palms to reveal a smooth stone polished by the sea into a perfect oval. For you, she says in Greenlandic, her voice tiny but clear. You take the stone with both hands, mirroring the respectful gesture you've learned. Why? You ask, gently. She shrugs with shy pride. Pretty, she says, like light on water. Your throat tightens unexpectedly. Sometimes meaning arrives not in long sermons, but in small gifts, freely given. Mari darts toward Matthias to inspect his carved duck spoon. He pretends not to notice her approach until the last second, then gasps theatrically and presents it like a magician revealing a rabbit. She giggles, delighted, and soon half the room is laughing with her. Tiny sparks of joy, enough to light a whole night. When she's collected her treasure and scampered out again, the room settles into a gentle hush. One by one, people drift toward their bunks. Someone snuffs a lamp, someone hangs a coat, someone mutters a prayer, half asleep. The kind of soft end-of-day choreography you don't think about, but come to treasure. You stay a moment longer by the fire, letting its warmth seep into your hands. You think about the day, the routines, the frustrations, the humor, the care, the language learning, the shed raising, the tiny berries, the whispered doubts, the shared stories. Another complete missionary day, woven from threads both ordinary and extraordinary. You think of what might last from it, maybe the new words in your notebook, maybe the repaired tools, maybe the bond strengthened with Pavia's family, or maybe just that smooth little stone in your pocket, a reminder that small beauty survives even in harsh places. A quirky tidbit floats up as you stare into the embers. One missionary once wrote that Greenland taught him the holiness of small tasks, because no grand moment ever arrived the way he expected, just tiny ones that mattered more than he realized. You feel that truth tonight. The fire dims, your eyelids grow heavy, and the mission house finally quiets completely, wrapped in the strange, soft glow of a sun that refuses to sleep. You rise from your stool, bones pleasantly sore, and head toward your cot. Tomorrow will be another day of hauling water, learning words, tending fires, navigating tensions, laughing at mistakes, and finding purpose in the slow, steady rhythm of life at the edge of the world. But for now, you slip beneath your blankets, the stone tucked safely beside your pillow. The room settles, your breath deepens, and in the half-light of Arctic summer, you let yourself drift gently toward sleep, held by the warmth of this unlikely home. And now, we slow everything down. Let the last traces of sunlight fade softly from your imagination. Let the sounds of the mission house, those murmured voices, those creaking beams, that quiet hum of fire, melt into a long, gentle exhale. You've carried a whole day through cold mornings, busy afternoons, bright summers, and thoughtful evenings. You've walked across snow and soil. You've shared food, shared stories, shared stillness. Even now, you're wrapped in the quiet glow of routine, like a warm shawl pulled up over your shoulders. Feel your breath lengthen, unhurried. Inhale slowly, hold, and let it slip out smooth as a tide returning to the sea. Imagine the fire's last embers dimming in the hearth, soft red breathing into soft gray. Imagine the mission house settling deeper into the earth, calm and steady beneath the endless sky. Your thoughts can wander now, lightly, like drifting snowflakes. No need to hold on to anything. Let the day dissolve into a gentle blur. Warm faces, soft laughter, flickering lamplight, the cool weight of a stone in your palm. Let it all float quietly to the back of your mind. Outside, the world isn't dark, but it's peaceful. The sky glows faintly. The air lies still. The land around you rests in its quiet summer dreamscape. You can rest too. Breathe again, slower this time. Feel your muscles loosen. Feel your shoulders soften. Feel the warmth of the blankets holding you, steady and safe. You've reached the end of this long Greenlandic day. Nothing more is needed. Nothing more is waiting. Just this gentle drifting calm and the whisper of sleep rising softly to meet you.